Spike Lee's laid this film highest to lowest. Now, some folks are calling this a flawless masterpiece, while others are saying it doesn't quite live up to the hype. Personally, I think it lands somewhere in the middle. Not Spike Lee's best, but definitely not his worst either. Before I go any further though, this review will be split into two parts. The first half will be spoiler free, and then I'll move into a spoiler section where I break down specific scenes and story choices that I just don't really necessarily agree with or agree with. If you've already seen the film and you want to skip ahead to the spoiler section, check the timestamp below. For everyone else, don't worry, I'll give you a clear warning before the spoilers begin. So what's highest to lowest about? It follows a powerful music mogul played by Denzel Washington, whose name is David King, who gets caught up in a ransom plot that threatens both his family and his legacy. This movie is a modern reimagining of Akira Kurosawa's 1963 classic High and Low. Where Kurosawa's original was about a wealthy shoemaker, Spike Lee's version swaps that out for a music industry giant. The setup is nearly identical, but the execution feels very different. High and Low plays out like a slow, calculated chess match. Highest to lowest, on the other hand, is more like a fast-paced game of checkers. Moves come quicker, but it doesn't always feel as deep or as strategic as it could be. The pacing starts off rather slow, but once we hit the second act, the film really starts to pick up speed, sometimes maybe a little too much speed. A few moments feel far-fetched or just a little too convenient for my liking. Now, if you've seen a Spike Lee joint before, you will not be surprised and pretty much expect plenty of pro-black messaging. It's upfront and center here as well, and while I appreciate the intention, at times it felt a bit too in your face. In my opinion, black excellence shines brightest when it flows naturally through the story and the characters rather than being hammered into the dialogue. But hey, that's not really the Spike Lee style of doing things, so it is what it is. Let's talk about the score for a second. Given that this story is about a music mogul, I was expecting a killer soundtrack or a lot of music infused into it. Instead, the opening number gave me musical vibes, which I don't even like musicals, so yeah. It was so much so in that realm that my girl leaned over in the theater and asked me if it was a musical we were watching, as the opening was still going. And I obviously said no, but honestly, for a second, I wasn't sure. Some of the music choices throughout felt kind of out of place, dragging down the intensity of big moments. And when you get to the ending, you kind of understand the music choices, but it still doesn't work even when you know why it was chosen that way. Now, performance-wise, Denzel Washington does what Denzel does. He plays David King, and he commands every scene. That said, some of the action sequences, no. Denzel running around against guys half his age felt a little unrealistic. Still entertaining, don't get me wrong, but you definitely have to suspend a lot of disbelief here. ASAP surprised me. He was actually pretty good, solid performance, I'd say, and there's even a track that ties into the film that I actually really enjoyed. Assuming that will be on his new album, probably. But anyways, then we have Jeffrey Wright, who is also here playing Paul, the driver. And while this character is interesting, I wish we got more development between him and David's character, or Denzel's character. Their history felt hinted at, more intertwined, but never fully explored, which is in stark contrast to High and Low, which it's really just a employer-employee situation. And they just happen to have sons that end up playing together. Visually, the film looks absolutely beautiful. I really liked how it looks. Spike uses sweeping shots of New York City and plenty of spiraling camera movements. It's a bit of a ride. Compared to Kurosawa's methodical stage-like setup, this film feels much more vibrant and dynamic. And I especially love the color grading. Everything pops. It's great. But that's not to take away anything from Kurosawa's. The use of lighting when introducing the bad guy and when he's doing bad guy stuff like we see here is absolutely haunting. And on top of that, his use of space as characters come in and out is brilliant. But also, though I do like the color grading in Spike Lee's version, I will admit there's this strange glossy sheen to the picture that I couldn't quite figure out. I don't know what it is. Something about the way it looks. I do think I like it. It's not bad. It doesn't really ruin anything. So, bottom line for the spoiler free section, Highest to Lowest is a decent film. Not better than the original if you've seen it or you're planning on watching it, but if you treat it as its own separate story, it works very well. Think of it kind of like Spike Lee's Old Boy, which I did a review on that too, comparing the two movies together. You can check that out here. But as I've said, it's almost impossible to improve on a masterpiece. So you just have to see these movies as kind of their two separate, distinctively different things that just happen to have similar plots. For most people, especially those who haven't seen High and Low, this film will be enjoyable. Okay, so now for the spoiler section. If you haven't seen the movie, now's your chance to get the heck out of here. Alright, if you're still here, that means you've either seen the movie or you don't mind spoilers, so let's get right into it. One of my main issues with Highest to Lowest is how the kidnapper's plans feel less thought out than the Kurosawa version. In High and Low, the villain feels, meticulous, like he's been plotting this for years. There's a real hatred that he feels. In Spike Lee's version, it often feels like a series of coincidences. Not everything, but there's definitely some moments like the money exchange with the biker gang. Feels very well positioned for the biker to grab the bag after just, not randomly necessarily, but pulling the brakes and causing the train to stop. It's a perfect time for him to fumble and the guy to be right there waiting for it. Seems a little bit too perfectly timed. I mean, yeah, the whole scene, that whole biker scene, the exchanges between the bikers is pretty slick, but after one of the bikers gets caught, we never hear about him again. No interrogation, no follow-up. It's just dropped as if it doesn't matter, as if it's not a key pivotal moment to everything. We don't even get to see if ASAP or young felon, is distributing the money around. What happens to the others who are helping him? There were accomplices in the original version, but there was a plan to take them out so they couldn't really do anything or rat the main guy out. In this one, it seems like they just forgot that he had accomplices in the first place. Then we've got the cops. Oh my God, these cops are so stupid. Now, I get it that Spike Lee doesn't exactly portray police in a positive light. Most movies don't. But here, they aren't just incompetent. They're freaking just useless. David and Paul are the ones who actually do the work that the cops are supposed to be doing, while the cops add little to nothing. In fact, they actually get in the way of their own investigation when new evidence is brought to them. In the original, the cops were sharp, they were methodical, playing a huge role to actually track down the kidnapper. That layer of tension is just completely missing here, and basically kind of replaced with this, action thriller. On the topic of Spike Lee's pro-black messaging, before we get off of that, it's not that it doesn't belong, but sometimes it undercuts the story. There's even a giant Kamala Harris poster in one scene that just made me kind of laugh. Like, I just didn't really take it seriously. And don't get me started on the cringe line. There's one line about black female excellence for the win, basically. It's from the cop. I don't exactly remember the exact line, but it was something along that. Instead of trying to hammer that in with a dialogue, just let her be competent and brilliant. It would have sold the point way better. And make your cops a little bit more realistic and less just try-hard haters just because. The score bugged me a lot in this. It was a mix of old school jazz and modern tracks. Could have worked if they built it gradually, starting out with maybe a modern day music and rap and hip hop and slowly transitioning into more classic, more jazz stuff. But instead they just flipped back and forth. Some moments that could have felt intense lost their punch because the music didn't match the vibe. Even the beginning sequence, as I said, sounded like a musical. You weren't setting the tone very well if you're trying to use the emotional impact of music. It just wasn't there. Now, maybe it was the intention to throw us off, but I don't think so. All it did was make the starting very confusing for me and my girl when we didn't know if we were watching a musical for a second. Now, the ending, though, with David signing that young artist, I think was perfect. A lot of people aren't happy about that ending. I think it was actually very brilliant. That final song fit beautifully and wrapped things up very well. At least I found that. The best moment in the whole film, though, was the mini rap battle between David and young felon. It was funny, emotional, and surprisingly authentic. Honestly, I might just do a whole breakdown video on that scene alone because it was just that good. Now, let's talk character arcs. In High and Low, there's this big moment where the businessman decides to pay the ransom. He resists, a lot. He resists constantly, every time asking him to do it, and he was saying no. Until the final Second, when he realized the value of the human life outweighs everything else, even his own pride, which I think was a huge part as to why it wasn't just about giving up the money, which was going to bankrupt him. It was also because he also felt like he was being bested, locked into a corner when the kidnapper actually made a big mistake and took the wrong kid, and he's still suffering for it. It was a powerful moment. In Highest to Lowest, Denzel's character feels more pressured into the decision by everyone else around him rather than coming to that realization himself. It just didn't have the same hit for some reason. To me, that robbed that moment of realization of its full impact. Now, in High and Low, this pretty much brings an end to the businessman. Obviously, he's still in the film, but his major purpose has been served, and the cops sort of take the helm for the rest of the movie. Now, in Highest to Lowest, there's still so much more that Denzel's character has to go through and do after, so their arcs are a little bit different there, but they both conclude the same way, which is realizing the love of their craft. Denzel Washington or David's for music, and the businessman and the Japanese version for shoemaking. But both end in a relatively good way where the main character realizes the love for what they used to do, and they end up opening smaller companies or running smaller companies that give them the ability to have that love and still be part of the business. And finally, the action scenes. Look, I love Denzel, but Hollywood has to stop putting him in a situation, or any man of his age. I think Bruce Willis for a while was doing this too, where a 70-year-old man is supposed to take down someone half his age in a fist fight. It just looks silly in my opinion. Young Felon or A$AP Rocky's character was like 35 and he's getting beaten up by a 70-year-old man. Come on now. With no weapons, no guns, no nothing. If people get mad about tiny 120 pound women taking down 240 pound men in a fight, I think they should be mad about this too. To me, it's much the same thing. But at the end of the day, I think High and Low is still a superior film, but Highest to Lowest works as a modern reimagining for audience who will probably never go back and watch a 1963 black and white Japanese classic movie. Right? Like, let's just be honest. Most people are just never going to see the original, and it doesn't matter to them. The movie, Highest to Lowest, it's stylish, entertaining, and has some great moments, even if it doesn't quite hit the intellectual height of the original and doesn't really tie all the loose ends really nicely. I also want to put in that scene about Denzel and A$AP at the very ending in the prison. It was good, but the ending scene of High and Low in the prison was way more powerful. So would I recommend this movie, Highest to Lowest? Yeah, I would. I definitely would, especially if you're a fan of Spike Lee or Denzel Washington. Just don't expect perfection. This is not the Oscar movie for either of them, though who knows, but I don't think so. Question: have you seen Highest to Lowest yet? And do you think it lives up to Kurosawa's original? If you've seen that, or should Spike Lee have left it alone? Because I'm of the camp that if it's a masterpiece, you don't really need to remake it. You don't need to touch it. You should probably be remaking films that are bad or have bad executions, but good concepts. I don't know how I would feel if someone tried to remake Casablanca, for example. Probably just don't do it. Obviously, Casablanca is a whole different thing, very specific to the time period, but still, don't try to make a modern version of it. But if you are going to try and remake a classic like that, Spike Lee probably did do it the right way, I guess, or the best way you probably could do it, where most people don't know about the original and aren't likely to go back and watch the original, giving him carte blanche to do whatever he wants. So if you were to remake Casablanca, I'd say give it like 200 years, because the Japanese film, most Americans aren't just not going to see that. So you're not really hurting most of your target market there. But Casablanca is a completely different story. So I would probably give that 200 more years since its release. And then maybe you could remake it where most people are just not going to go back and rewatch it unless they're big movie buffs. And that's it for the video. If you enjoyed, you'll love the next one coming up. But until then, like, comment, subscribe, and share this out.